Okay then, guys, apologies for that slight little technical delay there, getting the webinar started this evening. For some reason, mine wasn't set up as the presenter. It now is, and I think we are good to go. So thank you for all joining this evening. It is the Welsh Athletics Stay Involved series during obviously the lockdown period because of COVID-19. And thank you very much for joining me. And I'm going to be talking this evening around introduction to sprinting mechanics. Before we get started, a couple of house rules. You should all have a box on your screen that's got some drop-down things. If you have any technical issues, if you could please put those in the chat box. If you press the open out button and any issues you are having with the chat box in there, someone who's doing some technical work will help get those issues to me. And then also we will be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, the questions drop-down box is also on the side. So if you have any questions relating to the presentation this evening, or anything around sort of sprinting, mechanics, training, whatever it may be, put those in and we'll have a little session at the end around Q&A. Now I'm going to try and keep this on track and kind of like to the point. I know what I'm like sometimes, and I can kind of get a bit distracted and go off on a tangent. But yeah, we'll try and keep it moving along, ticking along nicely. You'll have to bear with me a little bit. When I tend to present normally, I'm very visual. I do a lot of demonstrating. I get up and I move around. So sitting in a chair, just talking to my screen now is one of the most uncomfortable situations to be in. But it's a new challenge. We're all dealing with new things that we didn't think we would have had to in the last few weeks. So let's roll with it and see where we go. Okay. Let's get going with first order of business. To my knowledge, we have no fire alarms planned this evening. If there is a fire alarm, you're in your own house and we've got a quarantine, so there's not much I can do about it. I also like to do a bit of humor, but there's no one to actually interact with, so I don't know if you found that funny. Anyway, carrying on. Firstly, around the aim of the presentation this evening, you should all have seen the information sent out. And really the whole point of the presentation this evening is to sort of increase people's knowledge and understanding of sprinting mechanics. And it's targeted at sort of young developing coaches, new coaches, or maybe parents of athletes, or even maybe I think there's a couple of athletes in here as well. So that's kind of the aim and the understanding of breaking down some of the mechanics of sprinting, and hopefully we can further some of the understanding within those. I work for a governing body, so learning objectives are some of the things that we have to talk about within coaching. I don't really know what that means, but it's one of the things that we've got to talk about. And ultimately for me as a coach, this is about trying to help share some knowledge and talk about things that we can all hopefully improve on. So the whole objectives of this evening: simplifying the technical models of sprinting, really breaking it down into a couple of component parts, getting into those component parts and looking at how we can kind of develop them from a coaching perspective. Understanding the key mechanical positions during acceleration and max velocity. So by that I mean there are key markers that we will see consistently through all good level sprinters that we can take down to work with development level athletes. A lot of the videos that I'll be trying to show you tonight will not be the Usain Bolts and the Alison Felixes because of the technical models they're working to. They're absolute freaks of nature, and the things they can do physically, not everyone can do. So the videos that I'll be showing are videos of athletes I've worked with from sort of 18 years up, development level athletes that we've done some specific things with. Also, potentially one of the biggest important things for me with sprinting and some of the common faults is the potential risks that long term they can come with if athletes are sort of hitting incorrect models and putting themselves in positions and shapes that actually could be putting a lot of stress onto their body. And then also with that, we'll look at how we can actually implement some of these things into training and hopefully give you some ideas around variations within that training as well. So hopefully you're all on board with that and we can kind of start getting going. So as I said, this is very much around sort of young developing coaches who recently may have all been through either their assistant coach or their coaching badge. And I would implore you to use Athletics 365. It's a great resource. There's lots of great information on there. And I just wanted to flash this in the next slide up as a kind of a point of reference for you guys that they're always good to go back and have a look and just reconfirm your learning, make sure you're understanding what it is you're going through. And my sort of presentation this evening is predominantly looking at how to look at some of these Athletics 365 things and put those into in a specific coaching perspective. One of the big things for myself around coaching is language, the use of language. And there's a lot of information on the 365 and the information you get on the courses, but sometimes the language of how to convey that to an athlete isn't quite portrayed. And it just takes a few years of coaching to develop that tool of how to actually communicate with athletes. I probably should have said at the start, I'll say it now, for some of you, if you don't know me, my name's Matt Elias. I'm Welsh Athletics lead for sprints. But I've been coaching for over a decade now, and it's been a hell of a journey. And that's where I'm starting to kind of get my mind around some of these things now. And hopefully I can start sharing some of that knowledge and help other people develop themselves. So that was why I just wanted to flash up these two slides as a starting point. As I said, they're a great reference for you to look at in the future, to go back and confirm learning. But the first thing for me today, as a coach, it can be quite daunting when you start talking about sprint mechanics as a young coach, and you hear biomechanists talk and you hear high-level coaches talk. It can be a little bit daunting once they start talking about sort of shin angles, power per stride, stride frequency, transition 1, transition 2. Because apparently there's research out there now that there's 2 transitions at elite level sprinting through acceleration. It's a mind-blowing field that it can scare people off. So when I started coaching, I haven't got the brain of the scientists. So I needed to simplify things for my own mind. And I think that's the beauty of coaching. For me, coaching simplifies science in a way that you can then give that knowledge to an athlete. And that's what coaching is. It's not about training people or making people tired. It's about teaching, and it's about trying to impart knowledge on those athletes. So my way of simplifying it when I first started was just breaking it down into 2 component parts. So looking at acceleration as a holistic view, and that can incorporate blocks, drive at whatever you want it to be. Acceleration is acceleration. And then max velocity, which is when you are at your maximum velocity during your race, what are the fundamental sort of mechanics that underpin that? So when we talk about acceleration, as I said, for me, it's that whole holistic, people call it a drive phase. I think for me, the word acceleration encompasses more around what we're trying to do mechanically. Your acceleration phase goes from the gun going up until that point you reach your peak velocity. So that full acceleration curve is something for me to be able to get my head around, and I can start conveying that more in a way that athletes may be able to understand it. And as I said, max velocity is just that moment that you are operating truly at max velocity. Once you go past max velocity, you're then into speed endurance and deceleration and so many other things. So for me, to break it down into these 2, and if you get the fundamentals of these 2 very, very well, and you were able to coach these two things strongly, you will be starting your way out as a coach very, very well. They're the two things for me that underpin everything. So to start with, let's look at acceleration. As I said, it's that kind of holistic, all-encompassing word that goes around the whole acceleration phase. So the components that make up acceleration for me, again, I try to simplify them. The first thing in conveying acceleration to an athlete is I use the word piston a lot. It is a piston action. The thighs are the focal point for me with the athlete. They are driving those thighs back and forth very, very fast as that piston motion. We see a lot of developing athletes coming out of the blocks or whatever type of acceleration run you're doing with a bit of a cyclical action, starting to stand up very, very quickly. So we've got to talk about that piston action. The next part, I've called it optimal extension. People talk about triple extension. For me, optimal extension explains it a little bit better. There's a few different schools of thought out there now around triple extension. Is that, are we fully extending at the hip when we push off the ground through acceleration? So if you think about an optimal extension, so we want to get an optimal extension through the ankle, knee, and hip off of each step. That's a way for me to be able to kind of break it down a little bit more in my mind and convey that to the athlete. Powerful split of the arms. We want to see nice, big, aggressive movements during acceleration. Acceleration shouldn't be a frequency focused task. It's about big, powerful movements. So powerful split of the arms, and again, in time with the lower limbs is something that we're looking for. Low heel recovery is a very big talking point for developing athletes. To get a true low heel recovery is quite hard, but it's something you want to work towards. I'll guarantee you all your athletes will have seen videos of Asif Apal and Usain Bolt doing toe drags, and they'll try and replicate it. Now, the one thing for me as a coach with developing athletes, you never want to do, never ever want to coach someone to do a toe drag. It creates friction, it slows people down, it throws off balance. There's so many negatives with it. The knock-on effect that it has later on in acceleration is massive. But we do want to start working towards this low heel recovery, which blends itself very well with the piston action. So as that low heel recovery comes through acceleration, it will gradually become more cyclical. You don't want to carry that low heel recovery through sort of past the 5th, 6th steps. It has to become a little bit more cyclical as we go through. When I was talking about the powerful arm movements, that links in with the large projection of the body through space. Now, again, the concept of acceleration for me is about projecting your body through space off of each step. It is not about how fast your arms and legs can go over that first 10, 15 meters. We see lots of athletes, especially development level athletes, hitting high frequencies very, very quickly at the start. And it has a knock-on effect. They reach a very quick max velocity early in the race and they have a very big deceleration later. So it's all about teaching how to project your body through space. It's about getting down the track as fast as you can and gradually increasing the frequency in your ground contact time as you go down. And then linked to that large projection is a gradual climb of the torso and head. We often see athletes, especially the younger ones, throwing their head up within 1 or 2 steps, looking down the track. They just want to get up and into their running as quick as possible. If you truly want to teach acceleration, it is a gradual climb that is also very much directed by the head. The head is a heavy part of the body. If we have any jerking movements of the head or quick movements, it's going to have serious knock-on effects further into the race or directly onto the steps that they're doing, to allow athletes to get up into the posture they need to be later in the race. So it's very much a gradual climb. And one of the things for me, I think I mentioned it in a later one, is the analogy of the airplane taking off. The best people at acceleration, they'll have that perfect sort of climb through the acceleration phase and a seamless link up into their max velocity running. It's beautiful. I'm a very visual kind of coach, and I like to watch things, and I'm very aware that I talk a lot, so I've tried to put videos into the slide today to explain what we're going through. But when we tested them earlier, they didn't come out great, so I've tried to actually upload them now directly to my webinar here now, and I'm just trying to see. It's not showing able to show the video, which is very disappointing. Okay, well, I will try to use the videos that are on the presentation. I hope they work. I will play them through a few times so that you can kind of get a gist of what we were just talking about. So you will look, the movements here we're looking for, as we talk about, a piston movement, low heel recovery, some of those things, gradually allowing the body to climb and things. And as I said earlier, this is an athlete that I work with from a young age. He wasn't sort of top level elite. He was a 10-8, 10-9 junior, got down to about 10-3, but we worked on a lot of these things. So I'll play this a few times through, and I hope that you guys can see it and just try and think about some of the things I was talking about whilst watching this video. Okay, I'll play that through again. Again, we're looking at that projection off of each step. Ground coverage is not too frequency orientated. If you watch the thighs, we did a lot of work around the drive of the free thigh, driving that thigh forward and then hitting off the ground to project his body forward into space. I'll try that again. I'm hoping that you guys are seeing this at least a little bit at a time and it's working a bit. If not, then I'll skip to the next slide. We can still talk through some of the shapes that the athlete would have been looking through. Okay. So I'm hopeful that you kind of got a gist of maybe that video. I apologize if it wasn't great. We are at the behest of technology, and for some reason they're not really coming through right now. What I will do is make this presentation available to everyone. We'll put the YouTube on. We'll put the webinar onto YouTube. But what we'll also do is we'll put the PowerPoint presentation available for you guys, so you can actually see the videos better on there. But we can talk through some of the things that were on the video on this slide. Where, as we said, so if you look at some of these pictures that Dewi, the athlete, is hitting, where we were talking about a large piston motion, projecting his body through space, very large, ballistic, aggressive movements. Now, Dewi, when I started coaching him, was a very, very frequency-orientated athlete. He loved to spin his wheels as quick as he could, and because to him it gave him the feeling that he was going really, really quickly, but he actually wasn't projecting himself anywhere down the track. So he bought into this concept, and he actually, his ability to accelerate became very, very good. His ability to project off of each step was fantastic. So I say, if you have a look at some of these pictures here, you can see very large split of the arms, nice powerful movements. Down here, that torso is gradually climbing, but you can see everything is still in line with the head, the spine, the rear leg. We're seeing a very mirroring of shapes through the whole acceleration phase. So these are some of the key points that we want to work towards when we're working with these athletes, is if you can hit key markers like this through your video analysis, then you're onto it. So those are the checkpoints that I would look for. For myself as a question, I like to ask questions of myself about the athlete. So one of the big ones for acceleration is the athlete able to project their body? Are they projecting down the track, or are they frequency orientated? If they can't project themselves down the track, I need to put some coaching in to place things in place for them, allow them to do that and learn the concept of projection. The second thing is the athlete relatively symmetrical. All athletes are slightly asymmetrical. No one's going to be perfectly symmetrical, but as long as we're in a small bandwidth and a safe bandwidth, then that's okay. If you've got large disparities on one side to the other, this is probably something you need to look at from a physical conditioning side of things, physical prep in terms of mobility, strength, range of movement, strength through range of movement. There's so many factors if you're seeing large asymmetries. And then also, can an athlete repeat a movement? Once an athlete can do those three things, then you can kind of advance those tasks on from a simple rollover start where they're on their own to potentially a tripod start, a block start, and eventually into competitive environments. So I kind of go through a bit of a checklist with those things before I progress on. Some of the common faults that we'll see in development athletes, and this is what I talk about in terms of where they could sort of lead to some issues later. So the first thing, as I spoke about, is that inability to apply the appropriate form and push the ground. They like athletes, especially young ones, they like to feel quick out the blocks. And it's trying to get them away from that idea and into this idea around their body projecting in space and a gradual climb up into their sort of max velocity. So you've got to teach them to push. You've got to show them how, like, it's almost one of the things that I heard a coach once say, that at the end of your acceleration, you should see the track ripped up in a big pile behind you. And it's a great visual cue, especially to younger kids. Get them thinking about a big pile of track. They're trying to rip the track off the floor to go down there. That leads into the second point there, that road misconception speed. I call it Roadrunner. We've all seen the cartoon Roadrunner, where it spins, and then takes off. And that's what you see a lot of development athletes doing. They come out of the blocks and they're spinning. They feel like they're going a million miles an hour, but they've covered about 6 or 7 meters, taking 9 or 10 steps. So we've got to try and get away from that. It could be that I said they have a lack of specific strength or coordination. So those are long-term things we need to do. And then also that common thing is they love to stand up. They love to look where they're going. And I guarantee you, in a 100-meter race, a 200-meter race, a 400-meter race, if you're upright in 5 or 10 meters, it makes the race a hell of a lot longer. If you're not getting up into your running till 20, 30, 40 meters down into the race, it gives you a much different perception of how you can maximize your potential within that race. So it's about trying to change the mindset a little bit. For me, coaching tips, this is a big thing, trying to convey this over to other coaches. In Britain, historically, and I know it is changing, we've got a lot of young coaches coming through, and it's great to see now, but historically in Britain, we had a bit of a long to short kind of mindset, because it was so cold in the winter. We didn't have any indoor facilities. We used to do lots of long, slow running to build a base, so to speak, in the winter. And then all of a sudden, once the weather got nicer in April, everyone would start sprinting. and we'd see all of a sudden a load of hamstring injuries because people weren't used to running fast. My advice to you as a coach now is accelerate, accelerate, accelerate. From day one or week one of your winter program, you should have some form of acceleration work in there. And that's for 100 runners, 200 runners, 400 runners, short hurdlers, long hurdlers. You should be doing acceleration work. It is the key to maximizing how fast their max velocity is, which will push their kind of speed reserves in some of the longer races, improve their mechanics, improve their efficiency, and make them better sprinters. So if you haven't got any indoor facilities around you, I'd advise to maybe go look around. What do you have? Even if you've got a sports center where you can do 15, 20 meters, if you can get on to something like that to do some kind of acceleration work. The big thing for me as well, teach a variety of starting positions. Don't just go straight into blocks. Kids love to do blocks because that's what they do in a race. But the more skills they have, the more skills you can teach an athlete, the better they will be as they get older within this sport. So teach them a rollover start. A rollover start is the start that Dewi was doing in that. It's a standing rollover where you allow your body weight to transfer and then just push off of it. Tripod starts, 4-point starts, block starts. Teach all of them, but then also make sure you start off of either leg. The benefits for long-term relay applications that this comes on, if you have an athlete that only start off one leg, then they're limiting themselves on relay legs to what they do. And if they start developing to sort of Welsh level or British level, then the coach of that team is going to struggle to really have confidence in that athlete if that athlete turns up and says, oh, I can only start on my right leg, or I can only start on my left leg. And you may think that's a bit of a joke, but I've been on British coaching staffs and I've been on Welsh coaching staffs where we've had athletes come on and say, oh, I can't start off of that leg, so I can only do this leg of the relay. Well, unless you are that much faster than everyone else, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage straight away. One of the big things I think you'll have probably got from me is I like to talk about concepts and things. So projection is a word you could use. Projecting your body. Teach these things to athletes. Get them to think about their body in space, their thighs potentially within the acceleration phase, and then rhythms. As I've talked about this projection, the rhythm of acceleration should feel slow to fast. Those first 4 or 5 steps of a race or a sprint run are the slowest of them all. You've got a bit of time to put force into the ground. So talk about these rhythms of feeling a little bit slower to faster. And then this kind of concept of gradually climbing. Don't allow the head to be thrown up. And just that body comes up in unison as one. If you master that, when they get up into that max velocity position, posturally, they will be in a great place. And max velocity after acceleration is all about posture. And then be creative. Acceleration is a great way to teach things, and you can only hamstrung by your creativity as a mind. A coach I've watched a lot growing up, and he's done some great things with athletes in Great Britain over many years, is a guy called Dave Lease, and a lot of you have probably heard of him. At one point, I saw him at the track with a little scooter, and he was purely doing that because the athlete he was working with couldn't grasp the concept of pushing the ground away from them. So he thought, what do you have to push? When you're on a scooter with one leg, you push the ground away. And I just thought that was a brilliant way of sort of trying to get the point across to the athlete. So let's move on. I've got another video here. I'm going to play it. I'm conscious that this may not work, so I apologize. This is a simple wall drill piston. So I'll try and play that through again. As I said, it's a simple wall drill piston where the athlete is driving their thighs back and forth. So this is just about giving them the concept of that thigh drive back and forth. It's a great tool to get athletes to feel that position, but being able to hold their body upright. The next one we have, which I think is an underutilized tool, is walking sled. Again, another good tool to get the athlete to feel like they're pushing the ground away behind them. A slow movement that allows them time to sort of adjust the body and push that ground away from them. I'll try and play that one again. So again, a nice posture, pushing the ground away from him, that sort of low recovery we're looking at. And what this does, I've said, it allows the athlete to feel the shapes that they want to be hitting during acceleration. The next one we'll go to, again, the third step after this for me will be a running sled. So again, you guys will all have seen these and done these, but again, I like to work on progressions. So this is Sam. Again, all we're working on here with Sam is trying to project off of each step. One thing Sam likes to do, which you guys may spot, is he likes to swing his thigh and cast out a little bit in front of himself. So when I talk about casting, it's this on this right side, that foot here just opens a little bit and he casts. So we've been working over many years for Sam on more of a piston action as opposed to a swinging action. And it's very much a work in progress. This was from probably 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. It's maybe 3 years ago. But yeah, I'll play this one more time. And these 3 steps, as I said, these are the ways as a coach we can sort of prioritize training modes, sort of, so to speak. So for me then, always be mindful when you're working with development athletes. You've got to be thoughtful of the type of person you're working with. So you should never load a weak position. Think about it: speed, repetitions, distance, they're all forms of load before you introduce a sled or anything. The switch drill you can do, you can advance that by putting a band around the hips so that that athlete feels like they have to engage the hips more. These are all loads that we can add, but we should only do that when we feel the athlete is technically capable and they're physically mature enough to do what we want them to do. You don't ever want to load athletes that can't hold good technical models. You don't want to load athletes that are hitting shapes that potentially could cause issues. So always as a coach, please be mindful of that. I'm starting to pick the pace up because I'm a little bit conscious that I've gone through acceleration in about half an hour there. So we'll try and go through max velocity a little bit quicker because I want to get onto some of the Wicket stuff at the end that hopefully some of you guys will get a bit more of an understanding of that. So when we talk about the mechanics of max velocity, we're talking about maximum vertical force. So like how much force we can produce down into the ground is what makes us run fast. Again, it's not about frequency and all these things. Sprinting is about rate of force production. So it's about putting as much force into the ground as you can in the shortest possible time, so that minimal contact time. So hitting the ground hard, but fast. As opposed to the piston action of acceleration, we're now looking at more cyclical movements with the arms. And we want, with the legs, and we want a arm split that is in very good timing with the legs. It still needs to be a powerful movement, but for me, the key to the arms are the timing of which they are with the legs. And then also a key component of how much force you put into the ground and in a short pace of time is dorsiflexion of the feet. Now, dorsiflexion, if you haven't heard that word, is about sort of pulling up the foot. So if you imagine this is my foot, that's a plantar flex foot and that's a dorsiflex foot. You see a lot of gymnasts with plantar flex feet. We want the opposite. We want our feet up, plantar flex ready to hit the ground. You will see a tiny bit of plantar flexion in the tiniest moment before ground contact, but that's okay. You don't want to see, as the athlete recovers and that heel recovers through, you don't want to see them in a plantar flexed position. And we'll talk a little bit about why later. It's not just about minimizing force production. A dorsal flexed foot, you will be able to produce more force, but also there are potential risks if you are a little bit more plantar flexed. So we've got another video here. Again, I will try playing it so you can kind of have a look at some max velocity sprinting. So this is Sam in Tenerife doing some, I think we were doing some fly 30s here. Again, I will try and play that through if I can. And then we'll talk about some of the shapes and the key performance indicators that I would like to see whilst an athlete is running in max velocity. Again, I'll play that through one more time. So again, we have a nice tall posture. Sam's trying to hit the ground as hard as he can in as short a contact time as possible, a much more cyclical running action as opposed to that piston action we saw. Okay, so max velocity for me is all about KPIs, key performance indicators, and some common shapes that we like to see from all athletes. And this is still from development level athletes up through to high level good athletes. So if you look at the first one, which is toe off, again, linked to what we were talking about in acceleration, that optimal extension off that rear leg. We want to see a nice optimal extension. One of the wording relative shin angles, however you like to talk about that, is fine. What I mean by that is we'd like to see the rear shin and this front shin similar in angles. If this front shin is sort of really tight up here, or we're kind of out in front of ourselves down here, it's gonna spell issues further on into the ground contact time. So we want to see some mirroring of shapes, and then again the arm action, we want to see some mirroring of angles with the rear arm and the front arm timed with the lower limbs. So those are sort of some of the shapes we'd like to see at toe off. The next one, if we have a look at flight, we want to talk about pelvis. So this pelvis position here, the neutral pelvis, the pelvis is not tilted back into an anterior tilted pelvis, and it's not sort of forward in front of the hips. So we've got a nice neutral pelvis through the middle, which balances ourselves. The front shin now, so we've got a neutral front shin, which for me, what I mean by that is the front foot is either directly underneath the knee joint or slightly behind. We don't want to see that front shin out in front of the knee during mid-flight. Again, if we do that, we're starting to cast out in front, and that causes, again, some issues further on. And again, we want to see this nice balance of the upper body and then the lower body. And then the third one is sort of ground contact, or we're just before mid stance here. Mid stance would be a couple frames further on. This is ground contact. So on ground contact, you want to see the knees relatively parallel. If not, the recovery leg slightly in front by a tiny bit. But you don't want to see this knee lagging way behind. You want to see them at worst parallel. We want to see a nice tight recovery, so where that heel is tight up towards the bum. The one thing with Sam, he's a little bit plantar flex, which I was talking about, but he manages it to recover it a little bit. It's something we've worked a lot on. And then forefoot contact. So we want to hit the ground on the forefoot. We don't want to be really high up on our toes, and we don't want to be completely flat-footed. Now, the one thing for me, the reason I've kind of chosen some of these videos and pictures is they're not perfect. They're by no means perfect, and these are things we're working on with Sam to try and improve. Because one of the big things for me, you can see quite a lot of slack in Sam's system, where he's kind of collapsed a little bit under ground contact. And I think this may have been one of our later runs where Sam was starting to get a bit tired. and I probably should have called the session here, because at this point now, as you can see, he's a little bit fatigued, so we're probably not working truly on max velocity here, and we're working maybe on a bit more speed endurance, where we want to see a bit better posture under that ground contact. Some of the common faults that we see in these developing athletes, as I said, the big one we see in the development level athletes is an anterior rotated pelvis. This is where the pelvis gets rotated backwards behind the center of mass. It's very big in female development level athletes. And if we don't correct this, it can lead to long-term issues with lower back and hamstrings. It's not something you want to kind of like fix straight away overnight, but it is something you want to address gradually over time. And for me, one of the best ways of working on an anterior rotated pelvis to getting those hips underneath into a neutral position is the wicket runs, which I will talk about very soon. Too high on your toes at ground contact. This will lead to some long-term issues with sort of the lower limb, calf, Achilles, plantar fascia in the feet. I can vouch for this. I was what was called a prancy horse runner. I was very high up on my toes, and over a long period of time of running like that, I developed chronic Achilles issues, which was not a lot of fun. So this is something we want to work on. One of the cues that you may have heard a lot is like, get up on your toes. For me, it's one of the worst cues you can give to a development athlete, because they will try and mimic that position and they will run very plantar flexed. If you've got an overactive front side, it's what you talk about reaching and pulling. I talked about that with Sam. You could be predisposed to some hamstring issues. So we don't want to get too overactive on that front side. And then if you're a little bit lacking stability through your core, your trunk, however you want to call it, you could get issues with your back or your lower limbs. Sam had that thing where he was collapsing. That could be a little bit of stability around the trunk. It could be a few other things, but these are all common things that we do see with some development athletes. Okay, finally, we'll talk about wickets. I know that these are a bit of a new concept in Britain. They're kind of the flavor of the month now. I see lots of coaches utilizing wickets, but I wanted to make sure people understand why and what they're doing with wickets. When I talk about wickets, I've got to kind of acknowledge for me where they came from. To my knowledge, Vince Anderson, coach at Texas A&M, is the first person who is implementing wickets for the reasons that they're used now. And my first exposure to them was at Altis with coach Stu McMillan and Andreas Bain, where they showed me the benefits of the wickets. So wickets are a set of basically the little mini hurdles. You can use cones, you can use cut off tennis balls, you can use whatever you want really, and they're set a specific distance apart related to the athlete for the athlete to run over. Now what the wickets do is they create a bit of a visual obstacle course, so to speak, for the athlete that forces the athlete to self-organize their body into a correct sort of posture. By doing that, it improves their posture running over the wickets. Their hips get into a really nice position, which then minimizes front side or rear side mechanics. So if they have that sort of anterior rotated pelvis, everything is out behind them. Because the wicket is there, they'll flick it. They realize that they can't do that, and they'll naturally reorganize and get those hips underneath themselves. Likewise, if they're out in front and reaching, they'll have to get their foot down and step down hard between the wicket so they don't actually kick the wicket in front of them. So the outcome of those two things is a much better vertical force production. So they can produce more force into the ground. They're also a great tool if you want to increase a bit of stride frequency. You can slightly shorten the distance and get them quickening up that stride length. So that's what wickets are and why they're used. Again, I'm hopeful maybe I think this is the last video I've got for today. So here we see Sam Gordon running over wickets, where we're trying to manipulate him into hitting the positions that I've spoke about earlier. And I think if you look at this again, The wickets are forcing him into a very, very strong pelvic position, minimizing rear side, and also he's not out reaching and pulling himself down the track. So the wickets, as I said, are that visual cue to force the athlete to step down. My tips for you then would be, when you start with wickets, the easiest way to start is just having the first wicket 15 meters from where the athlete starts. They have a nice easy roll where they can pick up a little bit of speed, sight the first one. And then what you want to do is you want to increase the distance of the wickets. Depending on the age you're working with, if you're working with really young kids, you can increase them maybe by sort of 5-6 centimeters, up to 10 centimeters. If you're working with athletes between sort of 16, 18, 20, then maybe you can increase them 8 centimeters to 12 centimeters every other wicket until you hit what is your sort of optimum stride length. For Sam there on some of those, I think we were working up to around 2 meters 30, 2 meters 35 with the optimal stride length that we wanted to work at. But with some of the development level guys I work with, we're down at sort of 2 meters 10. With some of the females, we're working sort of 190 to 2 meters. So you're going to work out what is that optimal stride length. If you want to increase the frequency of the athlete, then you want to shorten the wickets. If you want to increase their stride length, then you take the distance out. But you only want to do this when the athlete's physically capable and you're not making them reach and bound over the wickets. And for me, the wickets are great. I found being creative with them as a primer for acceleration sessions or max velocity sessions. They're really, really good at the start of a session. So be mindful when you're doing all of these works. You've always got to work to the physical and technical proficiencies of the athlete you're working with. Take what elite level people are doing and bring it down into your world of a development athlete and a development coach. Always work on appropriate stride lengths and stay within a safe bandwidth. If your athlete is working around sort of a 2 meters 10 stride length and you want to get them up to 220, you don't just go straight from 210 to 220. Maybe go to 213 and then 216 and gradually take them out. You don't want to put them into a position that they're at risk, basically. And then finally, I would never do any of this sort of serious technical work, max velocity or anything under fatigue. You're just going to be sort of asking for problems. I know I've flown through those last little bits there. I got conscious that I was kind of, the first bit was taking long. We will go into a Q&A session now. So if you had any questions, I think we have got a few on the thing here. I've got one that was sent in by Adrian Thomas. The first question Adrian asked was, would the coaching of sprints be any different between a 100-meter athlete or a 400-meter athlete? Now, for me, when they're running the race, the mechanical sort of models are slightly different. But if I was getting a 400-meter athlete to do max velocity work, the underlying principles of acceleration and max velocity are still the same. I still want to create the same technical models. I still want them hitting the same shapes, because then when they run their 400 meters and they're running slightly sub-maximal, they'll be operating more efficiently. Their speed reserve then will be greater, which hopefully means their deceleration towards the end of the race will be less, and they'll be able to get a much better sort of overall performance in that 400 meters. So ultimately, if they're doing pure max velocity work, the same principles for me are sort of there. One of the things I was asked or sort of told by a coach in America, again, Stuart Millen, he said, you've got to know the rules before you can break the rules. And that resided with me. I think even as a 400 meter runner, you've got to know the rules that apply, and then you can start adapting them once you've got a solid basis. Next question from Finn. Thanks, Finn. At what age can athletes start using blocks? For me, there's big variations within this. I think you're better off with younger athletes teaching them how to accelerate before putting them into blocks. It's much easier to teach an athlete how to use blocks once they know how to accelerate. So for me, I wouldn't have athletes who are under 13 personally in blocks. I would still have them doing crouch starts, and I would be focusing on purely on acceleration. If you get an 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old athlete accelerating very, very well, once you introduce blocks, they will learn how to use those blocks so much better. I think it's one of the cool things. Kids love to use blocks. It's just trying to get them to buy into learning how to accelerate first before it. So my key advice would be teach them to accelerate first. Once they can do that, once they can do a rollover start, once they can do a tripod start, once they can do a 4-point start, once they can do all those things off either leg, then I would introduce blocks. And only finally would I then introduce competitive blocks when they can do blocks individually and the technical model stays the same. So I hope that answers. Marcus Compampionu, sorry if I apologize if I've said that surname wrong. You have an athlete that stands up too fast on acceleration. You cue them stay low and rise like an airplane. They duck their head and bring their chin to chest. What are the problems with this, and what could? That's a very good cue. I think one of the things we see, athletes will try and go from one extreme to another. The wall drill, for me, you can use that as a marching drill, where you get the athlete to start at that 45-degree angle, and gradually on each step, you get them to come up in a straight plane, and everything comes up together. If you get them doing this walking with it, you can do the same again on a walking sled pull. If you do a walking sled pull, starting there, gradually coming up, but they have to maintain that nice, strong posture through. And video them and then show them what they're doing. So try and get them to think about something different on each rep. I said, don't be afraid to use videos as feedback. I hope that answers. David Ferguson, how do you plan volume intensity in general when coaching acceleration max velocity, particularly with a view of return from injury? Okay, kind of two parts to that question. For me, with volumes and intensities, I tend to do acceleration sessions as a standalone session, and I'll incorporate some sort of physical preparation work with it, some maybe explosive throws, explosive jumps, and maybe a very small amount of plyometrics if the athlete is capable. But for me, I would work on probably a total distance in acceleration of somewhere between 100 to 200 meters, dependent on the athlete's age and maturation, of total distance. So total distance, however you set that out, if you were doing 10-meter reps, 10 times 10 obviously would be a total of 100 meters. You could take that out up towards sort of 200 meters of total distance on some of the younger athletes. You may be able to push that a little bit more for some of the development level athletes. And then if I'm working on pure max velocity, some fly 30 type runs, because if we're starting to hit into deceleration and speed endurance, then we're not really working max velocity. So if we're working pure max velocity for a good level sprinter, I think they've got maybe 3, maximum of 4 30-meter maximal efforts is where I would see it out with a good sort of recovery. Development level athletes, their max velocity window will be a lot shorter. They may only be able to hold their max velocity for 15 meters, and they may be hitting it a little bit earlier in the run. So you may be able to do slightly higher levels of volume in terms of how much max velocity running you're doing there, because you may only be going out to 40 meters. They may hit their max velocity at 20, and they may be able to hold it for 15, 20 meters. So it's all about knowing where the athlete hits their max velocity and then how much you can do with that. I hope that answers. Sorry, I didn't answer the return from injury. The return from injury is a very tricky one. It's very dependent on the type of injury, the severity of the injury. For me, dribble bleeds are the best tool in return to running through injury. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube. If you want to email me after, I can send you some links on dribbles and how to use those in the best way to return from injury. And once an athlete, you can hit real high intensity dribble work in quite a safe way. And once athletes can do those at a very high intensity, you know you're in a pretty safe place then for almost a return to full training or a gradual increase into full training. Okay, Beverly Loweth, is knee height still an area that requires focus when developing speed? For me, knee height is a consequence of all other aspects. I wouldn't necessarily cue someone to run with high knees. The knee height will be the outcome of how much force they put into the ground, how quickly, and then how quickly that leg can recover. Limiting factors to knee height will be things like anterior rotated pelvis, potentially reaching too far out in front. And again, some of the things, if you cue high knees, athletes sometimes get a bit plantar flexed. They become a little bit just up and down, and they're not really thinking about putting force into the ground. The best analogy for me in max velocity is thinking of your leg as a hammer, and you're trying to hit the ground as hard, as fast as you can. It's not about sort of the high knees. If you hit that ground hard and fast, then the outcome of it will be that. Dwayne Chambers spoke a lot about that hammer. And one of the analogies I heard a sprint coach talking about once to improve contact time as well, it's thinking about hammer, but you've got to get off the ground quick. So if you think about a punch, if this is the ground here, you're not trying to punch through the floor, you're trying to punch and get off of it. So you're producing a lot of force into the ground, but getting off of it as quick as you can as well. So I think those outcomes would then help with that knee height. Okay. A couple more questions. I apologize if I don't get through these. We've got quite a few, and I believe it's gone 8 o'clock now. So I think, hold on. Okay, sorry. I've got a question here from Jeff Adams. Do you use 80-20 type model for organizing your sessions? Sorry, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't heard a lot around the 80-20 model that I deliver on. Okay, Xavier Morris, what's a good way to correct an athlete from leaning over too much? Again, this is something we see when we kind of want to get that forward projection. We see athletes sort of hinging at the hip and folding their body over in space. A great tool, as I talked about earlier with some of those wall switch drills, where you can kind of climb the body as you do those drills. Another one for me, as not just the sled pulls, if you've got access to a prowler is a great way to learn how to project your body in a very strong postural position. You have the push, you have the prowler out in front of yourself, and you're pushing it, and you have to get that body in a nice straight position to get that athlete out of that kind of kinked position. For me, some of the bounding activities, single leg speed bounds, throwing activities where you can do forward throws, again, trying to get the athlete to hit the shape where they're folding and hitting that strong sort of angular position and not folding over and just sort of hunching as it were. Okay, I'm very conscious of time. If I didn't get through your question, I do apologize. My email should be on the screen now. If you want to jot that down, matt.elias@welshathletics.org. Please email me. I've got lots of links that I can kind of signpost, which will help sort of put into context what I'm saying more. I'll endeavor to get this presentation out so you can see the video. I've put my phone number up there. I'm always open to coaches contacting me, asking me questions. I'm probably a lot better. I've kind of got my jumbled up a little bit, so I hope tonight has been interesting and you found it worthwhile. And even if it sparked one or two thoughts for something you're doing, reaffirmed learning that you've put into practice, then that for me, confirmation of learning is something as a coach that is very valuable. I really hope that you all take the time to fill in the feedback form that will get sent out after today. But yeah, thank you all for joining me. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and I really hope to see you all at a track very soon where we can talk about sprinting and whatever it may be. So take care, look after yourselves, and thank you very much.